You're listening to She Speaks, a Let Her Speak podcast that celebrates women's fearlessness, resiliency, and readiness to change the world. Welcome, everybody, back to the She Speaks podcast. I'm Catherine Porth, the founder of Let Her Speak and your host. And today we have another special episode for you. We were calling them mini-sodes, but as you probably realized if you listened to my interview with Booth Andrews, we use the term mini in a very gratuitous way. They're actually probably just as long as any of our other episodes. But you know what? It's our podcast, so we can do whatever we want to. So in this episode, we are speaking with Tiffany Gardner, First Horizon Bank. And we had a really great conversation. I can't wait for you to hear it. And without giving anything away, let's get into talking with Tiffany.
So I'm Tiffany Gardner, and I am a senior vice president. I work with First Horizon Bank. I manage our corporate and commercial banking group, which people go, well, what's that? And so basically we deal with businesses that are sales size of 25 million up and up. So think of your large companies here in Knoxville, and we probably do some business with them, along with a lot of other banks that do, because they use multiple banks. I've been with the bank since October of 2006. When I moved back to Knoxville, I'm a native Knoxvillian, went to Carnes High School, UT grad, and, went away to work for a while and then came back because I love Knoxville and my family's here. And so once you get kids, the grandparents kind of want to be around the grandkids. Yeah. So it works really well. So,
and you've been in the financial sector for your entire career?
My entire career, yes. Okay. I had a finance degree from UT and started out with Nations Bank, which is now Bank of America, had gone to Nashville and then was in Hickory, North Carolina, they were headquartered in Charlotte, and so I worked for them. So I've been there the whole time and doing this same job the whole time, commercial, corporate, lending, working with businesses.
Okay. All right. So you must really love
I do.
it. Yeah.
I do. It was interesting because I knew my dad's a CPA here in town, owns his own firm, and I knew I didn't necessarily want to be an accountant, but I really liked numbers, and I liked how because I would call him almost like a adjunct CFO for a lot of his clients. But the whole audit world and accounting, it's going to take a while to get to where then you get to have more of the conversations with clients. And so I knew I would not do well sitting in a back office for years. And so anyway, he put me in touch with several folks here in town. Sharon Miller Price, who owns the trust company. Yeah. When I was a junior in college, I had like a 1-hour informational kind of meeting with her about what she did. Alpha Patrick, who actually worked at First Horizon back in the day. She was over correspondent banking. And then a gentleman named Bruce Trimble, who did commercial banking for, at the time, it was SunTrust. And so met with him and I was like, wow, you mean you'll pay me to look at numbers, evaluate information, because I love math and numbers and all. And then I get to talk to people and I get to find out about their business and how they created it and what they did and the entrepreneurial side of them, which all those stories are fascinating. I just am amazed at how people come up with an idea and then they make millions of dollars, right? It's just fascinating to me. So once I heard that, I was like, this is what I want to do and have been doing it ever since. And I love it. I mean, there are days it's a job, but I love it. I really do. And I just love meeting all the people and learning. And let's face it, how many times have you driven down the road and seen like a building or a truck go by and you're like, I wonder what they do. Well, they probably need a bank. So I get to go call them and say, hey, I'd like to come talk to you about your banking relationship and how I might partner with you. And then I get to learn what they do, right? And so most people don't get to do that. They just see a business and they have no idea what they do.
Yeah. And you get to play, outside of being a customer, you get to play a huge role.
Right. And then I can find out about them and I can learn and I can see if I can partner with them and help, which is really, it's very rewarding from that perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, so part of why I wanted to bring you in and talk to you was about the, a topic that comes up a lot within not just the Let Her Speak community, but I think every community, regardless of who you are, this topic comes up is around imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
And I know you mentioned to me a couple of weeks ago when we were at your photo shoot that you hadn't really heard of that term.
I had
but
not.
You are very intimately knowledgeable of what all of that means, what
once
the
it was
feeling
explained
is.
to me,
Yes.
I was like, oh, I get it.
Yeah. So, which is really interesting. So I guess in my world, it has become something that like everybody uses that terminology now, that it's just such a common thing that you hear constantly, but I know everybody faces it and everybody probably calls it something else. So like
Sure.
in your mind, like what would you have called it?
I don't know. I don't know what I would have called it. I don't know. Nothing really comes immediately to mind. I guess maybe now I'm a little bit biased now that I've heard the imposter term, right? Because I'm like, I don't know. But I do know there's probably times over my career I have questioned or thought about. I think about the first time, a couple of times, I was getting my own group of customers to work with, and I went to meet with these folks, and I said, oh, Mr. Such and Such. And one of the ladies who was older than me and had been in banking for a while, after the meeting, she was like, you're their equal. And I'm like, I'm 25 years old. I'm the same age as as his daughter. He's the same age as my dad. I'm a good Southern girl. I say, but it's not really imposter, but it is. It's like you're in a role that is positional to, you're going to be making a lending decision to this person who's 35 years older than you, right? Like it definitely gave me a reset, right? So back to this imposter, because I didn't think of myself. I was like, I can do this job. I can do it. But there's the whole, wait a minute, they've owned this business for 40 years and they're coming to me and I'm 25 and saying, yeah, we're going to make you a loan or not, right? Like, I mean, I can see it from their perspective, right? And it's not that I didn't question that I couldn't do it. It just was more of a, this is different.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and especially, I mean, in your I feel like there's specific points at your life too, where it comes up in different ways.
Oh, absolutely. And this was early career.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Early career is 100% I'm not a student anymore. I am now looked at as someone who,
right. I thought I knew all this and I think I'm really smart, which is why I got the job. But then it's like, you begin to question, you can do it.
Yeah.
And there is a balance there, because a lot of us come out of school thinking, I'm the smart, and it's like, yeah, but there's a lot that comes with experience that and you hear it. I remember thinking, well, how am I going to get experience if I just don't do it? Well, yes, that's true. But I kind of coined the term professional maturity. Is there just things that as you're exposed, as you go through your career, that then shapes and changes to where it is a little different from that perspective. And it's not anything negative or positive. It's just the maturation process.
Yeah. Oh, you definitely experience that no matter what field you're in and what age.
That's my point, is that to me is something that's across all genders, age groups. You will have it at different points in time. I think that happens, and that's okay, and you recognize it of, hey, well, they're learning. If you're the older one, or if you're the younger one, you're like, oh, I'm learning from them.
Yeah. And the, one thing that I've at least noticed, and studies, show that it's majority of people, while this topic is talked about, I feel at a much higher frequency within groups of women.
Yes.
I mean, it's absolutely affects everybody.
Sure.
I was just watching an interview with Austin Butler, who recently played Elvis Presley in the movie Elvis. And he was talking about, he felt like an imposter, like, who am I to be an impersonation of this idol, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But I know it's definitely talked about much more frequently within groups of women. And so, and I'm sure, a lot of people are wondering, like, being a woman in finance, there's not so many of you.
I was going to say, it tends to be a male-dominated industry, which is interesting. And it's also positionally different. Like, so if you go into a financial center, you tend to see more women, but you don't necessarily, like in my role.
Right.
Right. And so it's an interesting, and what's so funny is, two things. One, when I met with Bruce Trimble at SunTrust, and he was an EVP, and, he hired people like me, and he told me, he said, he said to me, he said, I find that women are great in this role. He said, what we do run into from time to time is when they start having children. He said, not good or bad. He said, they start changing their thought processes. He said, I wish I had more women, but a lot of them choose. And again, you're talking, I've been doing this for 30 years, right? So, so think 33 years from when I'm talking to him. So things I think have changed from that perspective. To that point too, and then I'll come back to my other one. I can remember when I had changed banks and gone to Centura Bank, because it was the right thing for me to do. And it really helped propel my career. Like, I thought I knew stuff, but like, again, the bank you grew up in sometimes isn't the bank you should continue your career in, because all the mistakes you made, sometimes people don't forget, and they should, right?
Right.
So, so it was a great career move. Glad I did. Love the people I work for. And I can remember when I ended up deciding to have my second child, I waited for because I knew, because I was a city president, I had a big responsibility. I knew that some of my customers might worry about, is she going to leave us? Are we going to have a new banker? I also thought that my manager and some others might get concerned about that. It wasn't, I've worked the whole time. I love working. But I knew it could maybe be and again, we're talking about Hickory, North Carolina state, so much smaller. And we're talking, my son's 20 years old. So 21 years ago. And I remember we went on like a business meeting or whatever, and we were at dinner, and everybody was ordering drinks, and I was like, no, thank you. And my boss, I was sitting next to my boss, and I just love him. And he looked at me, he goes, oh shit. And I said, he goes, you're pregnant. I said, yes, but I'm not going anywhere. And so it was just comical. Of course, we had this relationship that was just wonderful, right? Like, he had two daughters, and we had a fun, and he knew, but I was conscious of it, because I didn't want my clients to worry and think, who's going to take care of me if they go out, right? Which is probably not the way you should think about it, because I'm having a baby, but hey, it's just who I am, right? To a certain extent. So I do think that comes in. The other point that I was going to make, that back to this whole, when Bruce Trimble said that to me, and I was like, I love it. I was like, I can see how that is an issue, because I'm a manager now. I think about that with people. We just work through it. It's not in a negative. It's just a situation you deal with. But, growing up, I mentioned my dad before, Van Elkins, he's a CPA. I was an only child for a long time, and then I have 3 half siblings, but I was raised that I could do anything a man could do, and probably better if I wanted. So, I had a very supportive father and mother, who was in business. And so it wasn't I never really thought, because I had that as my background, I never really thought of, I'm a female, they're a male. I never walked into a room and thought, I'm the only female in this group of male-dominated banks. I think there were women before me who probably had felt some of that more than I did, because of when I entered my career. I had a coworker years ago, I had a customer say to me one time, again in Hickory, smaller community, gosh, you've been so successful, and you don't really play golf. And I was like, well, I do, but, and they were like, you've been so successful. And I said, well, I kind of look at it that, yes, there's probably deals that, because I wasn't at the country club in the men's golf, locker room, that I didn't find out about. But I saw it as their loss, not mine. Right? I think so. I think a lot of times we have folks, it's about mind shifting and perspective. And so for me, while yes, I've probably experienced some of it, I also have just shaped it around, well, I took it to my advantage, I guess.
Yeah.
Now that's hard. It's self-talk. And
Yeah.
I'm not saying there haven't been times where I've been like, I can't do this, But the majority of the time has really been around, look, okay, things happen for a reason, and if I don't find out about that opportunity, that's their loss. That's not, they just missed the opportunity to work with a great banker.
Yeah. I really love that flip because a lot of it's so easy sometimes to walk in with a little bit of a chip on your shoulder because we know that there's unconscious bias that happens.
Oh, there is. It happens
there
everywhere.
All the time. Yeah. But
I've had it happen. I've had conversations with people who now do business with me that later were like, well, the first time I met you, I thought this, but now they're like, we hate, we're like, we want to work with you all the time. So it happened.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, to frame it in your mind of like, no, I am secure in that. I know I am really good at what I do. And yeah, they're the ones that are losing out.
No, and not to the arrogance, right? I mean, there's still things to learn, but it's a slight, you don't want to take it to the extreme, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. But still more of that security in yourself of, I know what I know. And,
yes. And again, I think some of that comes with that. Was I that way at 25? Not completely. I mean, because I was still new in my career and still learning some of those. Here's what I can say yes to when I'm sitting across from a client. Here's what I need to say no to, or hey, where I need to, let me find out, right? That before you've got to go back and get approval for something, knowing those boundaries. And some of that comes over time. So that helps with that security and knowing. But it also, you got to be secure in saying, I believe too in being very transparent, right? Of saying, I don't know. Here's what I think. Here's my concerns. I've got to talk to somebody else. Like, I think that's okay. And I personally, have found that people respect that and would rather know, right? Just it may hurt. They may not like it. I can think of a client that I turned down. And I said to him, I was like, you've lost all your profit in this, because he was a builder and he had this house for sale for like 18 months. And so he's had interest carry for 18 months. And I'm like, you don't have any profit. He's like, well, this bank's going to give me this line of credit and I can put these 5 houses on it and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, that's a great deal. I said, I have concerns. I said, but you've got to do what's best for your business. That's not the way I see it from the situation you're in. That's my opinion. You've been doing your business way longer than I have, right? It's opinion. I said, but do what you need to do. And can I tell you that 2 years later, he came back to me and he said, I should have listened to you. He said, you were trying to help me. You were not trying to make me a loan, to make a fee off of me. You were actually really trying to care about my business and wanting me to recognize it might be better to cut my losses. And I appreciated that because it was hard. Nobody likes to lose a customer.
Right.
But sometimes you gotta face some facts that it just doesn't work. But again, back to that security and knowing, hey, I know I made the right decision. It was hard, and I hated losing the customer because nobody likes to lose. Because if you're in this business, you got to have a little bit of self-security because you get turned down. No, because think about trying to call somebody and say, can I come talk to you about your banking? No, I'm happy with brand ABC. They're like, I don't want to talk to you. And how many banks are there in this town? Right? So think about it from the business owner's perspective. So you got to have a little bit of a tough skin.
Yeah.
But it was still hard, but I really appreciated, and he didn't have to come back and say that to me, right? 2 years later. But for him to do that made me go, you know what? I do know, and I'm going to stand my ground, and I'm going to do things. I'm going to do what I know is right, even if it hurts sometimes, because I was concerned more for him, not me and the bank. I mean, there was some concern there, but I was like, I'm just not sure that's the best business decision to maybe cut your losses and sell this house because you've had it for sale for 18 months, right?
Right.
Anyway.
I mean, was there anybody like internally that you worked with that, didn't necessarily agree, or did everybody totally understand?
Yeah,
from your perspective?
I mean, I didn't necessarily, I mean, I already knew. I was like, we're not going to renew this for another 6 months. I was like, it's already been out there for 18 months. And I was like, I think you either need to sell it because we might give you another 90 days to sell it. I said, I just don't think at this point you need to. And my credit partner agreed with me. So I really was the one driving that decision. It's always good to bounce things off of others.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
But I knew it was the right decision and they agreed with me. And that was the message I delivered. And, I had that conversation and
yeah,
it is what it is. So,
yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that's one thing that, can be really hard is that this need to want to please and to, you don't want to let somebody down. And especially in a industry like yours.
Yes. Well, think about people sometimes they think I've got this great idea. I can do this and I'm going to expand my business. I'm going to do this or whatever. And they know it, but they're still in the back of their mind, whether they admit it or not. Well, if the bank approves me, it must be a good deal. Like it must be good. Not always, but especially in your smaller to medium businesses, I think, I don't know this for a fact, but I think there is still something in the back of people's mind of, well, if the bank approves me, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It
then
must be okay.
I have something here. Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think there is that. I mean, because anytime you're stepping out into your own and starting a business, I mean, there's always something in the back of your mind of like, this might not work, right. But you need to hold on to, I have this idea, I've done my homework. I have
the entrepreneurial part of it.
Yeah.
Hence why I'm a banker and not an entrepreneur or business owner, because I've told people I live vicariously through my customers because I'm just not, again, I'm a banker for a reason. I'm a little more risk averse.
Yeah.
Right. So I have a lot of respect for folks who hold on to that and like, we're going to do this and we know how to do it and we're going to make it work. And because that just takes a lot. I mean, my dad's his own business owner and I'm like, I stress over just running my business unit, much less being responsible for the whole corporation or the whole business. I'm like, that's a little more stress that it takes a certain person. That's all I got to say.
I mean, there is though a lot to because everything that you just described. So I came from corporate sales before I went into nonprofit. So everything that you were saying, it's like, I mean, you're a salesperson.
Yes.
At the end of the day, that's not belittling. It's a huge thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. To be able to, for one thing, it's the constant like doors in the face or the phones clicking off type of mentality of like, I just got to keep going because there's people out there that I know I can help.
Correct.
Not everybody's going to understand or agree with the type of help that I can provide them. So I just got to keep going. And then to be able to have the fortitude of saying like, I don't think actually I am the best person to help you.
Right. And here's who, or this doesn't fit what we do. Or I mean, so it's a balance from that perspective. And, there's a lot, you're seeing a lot in sales shift or whatever, but I have always seen myself as more of a problem solver. Mm-hmm. Like, let me help you fix, because you either need money, I'm helping you. Because personally, while I'm a banker, I don't believe in a lot of debt. I don't. And so I think that's also a different perspective that I bring from that. But I'm a problem solver, but to be able to say to somebody, hey, let me help you. Okay, I can't. First Horizons policies, whatever, doesn't fit. But let me find somebody. I always try to at least find a solution, even if myself and or what my company can bring to the table isn't the right solution.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah. And I think it's amazing though, too, that you have worked in environments where that is okay to do that, because there's certainly other environments in the financial sector where it's like you got to push.
Well, think about the debacle that happened at Wells Fargo.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
that's because there is you've seen a shift, especially in the financial services industry around, we helped people, right? We were a financial center. We took things in, we made loans, to now the shifting around, well, we got to grow. And this isn't anything new, but it's, so it's more the sales environment versus an evaluation environment. And it's been that way ever since I came into the business. But I'm just saying, if you look over the history. And so that is a shift, and that is a difference around having this this duality to be able to want to build rapport with folks and get to know them and then build enough trust with you to then think about it. I'm asking you to share with me your financial information. When it comes to money, it gets personal, whether it's your own individual finances or your businesses. That's all. So you've got to deal that, and then to be able to turn around and then potentially criticize or ask a lot of in-depth questions about, well, why'd you make this decision? It's an interesting position to be in from that perspective, in that it's not pure sales, because you are managing risk and you have to evaluate. And so it is this difference. And to your point, and it's not just one person, right? Like, there's a team of us that work together to do all this. It's not just my opinion. I have great partners. Amy Avery's one, Stephen Percival, people that I work with on my team, Kirsten Burkett, that's my little team. And then I have a big team, but we look at it and they may see something different than I do. And you got to have healthy debate, and you got to look, and you got to be able to ask the hard questions to the client. And that's not always easy. And you may not, and guess what? You also may get the truth. You hope you always get the truth, but you get an answer that may not allow you to move forward with the transaction. And so you've now invested all this time. Now, granted, I see it as I got to learn something about somebody, and I always use it from a positive perspective. That's just who I am. But then you're like, wait a minute, if I took this negative information, well, can we mitigate that? If not, we're not going to be able to do the transaction. Okay, well, now that just set me back on my goals, right? So to your point, you got to be secure enough to know, I'm going to do what's right. I'm going to do what's right by the client. I'm going to do what's right for the bank, right? And that's a balance. And it's not always easy.
And especially because it is that intimate relationship, because you're literally opening up this person's life, and finances is not something that most people openly talk about.
No,
and they
hate to talk about
exactly,
it most of the time.
Most people do. And
death and taxes and their money, right?
Right. And you develop these really intimate relationships with people, and you want to help them so bad, but you know that it would be irresponsible.
Right. You have to do, right. So you keep that balance.
Yeah. So over the years, because one thing that I always dreaded was having to deliver bad news. And especially if it was like, I can't do what you're asking, or
nobody likes to get bad news.
Yeah. So has your approach to, because imposter syndrome can definitely come up when you're giving bad news to people and they're pushing back on you.
Yes.
Yeah. So have you developed over time, how you mentally prepare yourself to deliver bad news and deal with it?
Yeah, it's funny you mention that, because again, I typically don't procrastinate. Anytime you got to deliver bad news, you tend to procrastinate.
Yeah.
But what I have found is, for me, is I look at all the facts. I try to take the person, as much as I love the people, right? I try to take the personal piece of it out and look at the facts. And then I walk through those myself. I practice sometimes. Here's what I want to say. Here are the points I want to make. And then, because again, people think, oh, role play. It does help, even if you do it with yourself. And then again, for me, I have found it's more about being completely here. Transparent is really the word I like to use, but it's more than that. It's okay. Here are the 5 things that we evaluate. And based on these 5 criteria, here's where you meet 3 of the 5, or here's the couple of issues that we see and why we can't move forward. And so I try to be very black and white around and being very open with them about, here's how we evaluated this, and here's what we looked at, and here's why we look at this, and really give more than just the no, but really explain. Because to me, we all are learning, right? Because through that conversation, 1 of 2 things happen, 3 things really. One, they go, oh, wait a minute, but we had this, this, and this. And you learn a piece of information that may change the decision, right? Because all the facts are important, because one slight factual change could make a change in the decision, right? You talk to any CPA, they'll tell you that. Well, it depends.
Right, exactly.
It depends. To the owner, while they may not like to hear it, at that point, they get a choice to what they do with the information. And maybe it helps them go, oh, I haven't thought about it. Or, oh, I didn't realize XYZ, right? And third, they just get mad and move on. And unfortunately, sometimes that's going to happen occasionally. And while it hurts from the people side of it, and I've had some people call and yell at me before.
I was about to ask, have you had some irate?
I have. I can't believe that it, stood my ground. Now, earlier in my career, had a few tears. Nobody saw those tears. Customer didn't see those tears because I hung up and went in the back room and was like, oh my God, they just yelled at me. But, because we all have those moments.
Yeah, absolutely.
But understood, I was like, but I knew I made the right decision. But it nobody likes to be yelled at. Nobody does. Now, I've had times where we've screwed up and I deserve the yelling. Not really yelling, but had a CFO here in town say, yes, that took longer than it should have. Disappointed in how you handled that. And of course, you're crushed because they've been your client for years. And I'm like, yes, but I owned it. At some point, you're going to make mistakes. That's how we all learn. And so own them. Admit, I was like, yep, we screwed up. Here's what happened. That's the other thing. When we've had issues, and look, banks have issues all the time, right? When we bought Capital Bank and we went through our conversion, the day we did conversion that week was a nightmare. It was a nightmare and we screwed up, right? But you own it. And so then afterwards, going back and saying to the client, here's what transpired. Here's what happened in the computer system. Here was the human error mistake that was made. And I've had this happen I had a client call back and say, look, they were mad because it impacted their business, right? A lot of people don't realize that when we make mistakes, the impact that it can be and how, we had a situation the other, 2 or 3 weeks ago where we had a human error that happened and a payroll file didn't get processed as it should have in our back office because there was a concern about it being a duplication. It looked like it had come through twice. So we ended up not sending either versus we should have deleted and let that. Anyway, having said all that, so those people didn't get paid. It's in the trucking industry. Those truck drivers said, we're not delivering that product. So my client lost $636,000 in revenue because the product that the people they were paying to drive the truck to move it to that location said, unless I get paid, I'm not, I can see it completely. I had to that was a fun 45-minute conversation, tongue in cheek, around, here's what happened. Here's where we screwed up. We own it. What letters do you want me to write? Who do I need to call? Here's what we're doing so that this doesn't happen again. It was a training issue. But again, everybody makes mistakes. Some are bigger than others. And that was a painful mistake, but we owned it and said, what can we do? How can we take care of it? And they've come back and said, we really appreciate. A lot of it is how you own the mistake, right? If you're flippant or, well, we made a mistake, that's different. I think for me, what I've found is if you own it, admit it, we screwed up. And even if it was my back office, I'm not going to say Susie Q didn't push this button and they shouldn't have done that. No, we collectively made a mistake, right? If I made a mistake, I'm going to say I, but if it's somewhere in the group that helps support my team and all in our operationals, we made the mistake, but you own it. And that to me can also build some loyalty. I don't do it for that purpose. I do it because I put myself in that person's shoes and I'm like, we created a problem for them. And so we need to know and be empathetic, and because I wouldn't want that to happen. When you're messing with people's money, when it comes to payroll, I take that very seriously.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I know that was kind of a little tangent, but I do think it gets back to, because that is delivering bad news, right? There's the bad news of turning down, but then there's the bad news of, oh, we screwed up, right? And that's tough. But you gotta, while your insides may be butterflies and you may want to throw up afterwards or before,
Yeah.
again, back to this trend, just say, here's what happened. I think people are reasonable. 99% of the people are reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
And look, they're frustrated. I think that's the other thing is you got to recognize they're frustrated. It's okay for them to be frustrated. I would be frustrated if I was in those shoes. So if they yell at me, it's not really me. They're just mad and frustrated with the situation.
Mm-hmm.
So let's deal with the situation. And then later, if there's other issues, okay, then not all customers are good customers, right? I mean, sometimes you don't jihad with somebody and it doesn't work and you have a personality conflict and okay, not all business is good business.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Which is that's something we in the entrepreneur world too, we talk about all the time of like, not all customers are the right customers.
Right.
And at least in my personal experience too, I have found that you can actually build amazing loyalty with how you handle your screw ups more than you handle your perfect
Absolutely.
situations.
Like the one I just described. I mean, literally that was 3 weeks ago. And I mean, but they appreciated it and they knew, and some of it comes over time, right? Especially like when you're an entrepreneur and you're starting your business and you want to do everything right because you're trying to build your business. And I get that. And sometimes you got to have a few screw ups.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you're going to anyway,
Oh, yeah.
and you may lose a customer. But again, I kind of turn it to the positive. If they're not willing to allow me to screw up, is that somebody I want to be in a relationship with? If they're going to always hold it over my head of, well, you screwed this up, so for this 10 cents, I'm going to move you or whatever, that just creates more stress for your business than maybe you don't need,
Mm-hmm.
right? We exited some business with something we did, and it was just for the amount of time that we were putting in. And for what the U.S. government would pay us to do. I know that sounds horrible, but it was just like, because they have certain contractual rights for certain deposit accounts and some things. And I just was like, it was more work than really what we were being paid for. And I was like, you can look at those hours. Because that's the other thing that I don't think a lot of people think about is there's the money, there's the hard dollar that you see, but there's
Mm-hmm.
also all the soft time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? So like if somebody's having to spend 2 hours every day on something that's not even at your standard price because you wanted the business so bad, is it really worth it?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
exactly.
that's hard, again,
Yeah.
because if you're starting a business and you're trying to grow it and you've got this great opportunity and it's going to be $1 million in revenue for you, but what kind of stress is it? Is it better to not take the $1 million contract and take the $200,000 contract because you may not be as stressed and you may have, they'll work with you and they know that you're a new business and that they may give you a little more grace to have some screw ups?
Yeah. I think that's something that it's not discussed as much. Like I'm thinking back to like going to, being in the business school in college,
right,
where, you were always talking about the profitability, return on investment. We don't necessarily always talk about the return on quality of life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. And the quality of life outside of work, but quality of life within.
Yeah.
Just making it happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
And the customers that you're working with, your internal teams that you're working with. And, and that was another thing too, that, it took me a little bit of time to really learn in the corporate world was the, importance of your internal customers.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And because it's not talked about as like in business school, it's never talked about.
No.
Yeah.
It's one of those things it's like I tell a lot of folks, I was like, my assistant and my team, the 3 people I was like, I am only as successful as we are successful, right? It's a symbiotic relationship. They, just like our back office at the, in operations and all, they need me out there developing business and bringing new customers to the bank and all, right? So that they have jobs, because my revenue that we bring in of those customers pays their jobs. But I don't have that revenue and can't keep those customers if they don't do their job, right? So, it's very much, and you're right, it isn't, as I think back, it isn't talked about as much. Because again, I think it is more so now, because I sit on the finance advisory board at UT, and And so I do think it is talked about a little bit more.
Yeah, I think it's starting
it's not as much of this, book knowledge.
Yeah.
The foundations are there and they were great.
Yeah.
But I think it's also more, they're doing more with the real world experience around, well, what about this? And how does this impact? And
Yeah, I think organizational culture is becoming more normal, but
way more normal.
Yeah. But
and it's important. I mean, that's why I work for First Horizon. I mean, we've got a great culture and people care, right? Like, it's just nice to know that, you can call somebody and they know, and I will say, I mean, I've had my times where I've been yelled at by a client and then I'm calling to my backup because I need their help with something and I'm a little agitated in my voice. And I have called back and said, I'm sorry. I was like, you just got to understand, I just got yelled at, so because they don't necessarily, people call us, they don't call them. Mm-hmm. So, there's a little bit of, from time to time, I've had a few of them on the phone just because I needed them to explain technically maybe an issue had happened. And so for them to be on the phone, I was like, I just want you to hear what I'm having to be prepared, because that's not always what they experience. And that's okay too. That there's nothing wrong with that. It's just kind of helping.
Mm-hmm. So since we've talked a lot about customers and now we're starting down the road of like internally, because I know being in a leadership role, you're not only delivering bad news sometimes externally, but you're having to internally, exactly, and having those difficult conversations.
Both from managing up when your business results aren't good, and then managing people when they're maybe not performing as well. Yeah. So as you think about imposter, it's like, oh, yes. It's like, I can do this, You go, you think you know what you know, and then you really find out what you don't.
Right. So do you is it a similar approach to talking externally to customers, that if you're talking to a member of your team or if you're having to talk upward?
Yeah. Okay. I tend to frame things. So like when I am dealing with like employees and maybe there's a situation we need to deal with. And I've done this over the years, I would rather one, as a manager, you've got to modulate and really build relationships, because you can build relationships. And when you build a relationship, then if you have to deliver a bad news or give something, a constructive criticism that maybe somebody doesn't want to hear, if they know you and you have a personal relationship from a friend perspective, sometimes that's easier. It's easier pill to swallow. My personal belief, not in all cases, but and then two, you got to know where is somebody, maybe this isn't the best time to tell somebody, hey, you screwed up on this or there was a problem. But I always see it as my personal philosophy is no one shows up to work to do a bad job, right? There are things that are going on at home that we don't know about that they can choose to share or not. I'm pretty open. I like for people to be open, but not everybody on my team is open, right? That's their personality, and you're allowed to be yourself, and you should be yourself, right? Your authentic self. And so being able to then frame it around, hey, I had this situation, and I try to take the personality out of it and go to the actionable pieces to say, this was the situation. Here's what I perceived or saw from an actionable, tell me what you saw or how you felt during that. Really try to get their perspective and then talk through, hey, I'm sharing this information, I'm delivering to you. I can remember having this conversation. I'm giving you this feedback. It is your choice what you do with the feedback. Took me a long time to learn that one. But I've done it a few times. I'm like, that it worked, right? Because obviously I like a lot of people, I care. And so to be able to separate it a little bit, because you want that personal relationship, but you also have to have that, there's also that manager role, right? That leader role. But to be able to say, look, I'm sharing this feedback, it's your choice. Then at that point, the individual has a choice of, I'm going to receive this feedback. I'm going to think about it. I'm going to either choose to make a change or not. And there could be consequences or may not, right? But it's a choice. And I think framing it that way really helps. And because I mean, I've had to let somebody go, and nobody wants to do that when you know somebody's a single provider, sole income for their wife and 3 children. Nobody wants to do that, but Pam Fansler, who longtime banker in this town, she was like, it won't be easy. And she sat in with me the first time because she knew it was the first time I'd had to let somebody go. So I really appreciated that. Again, moral support, right? Having that manager that can do that.
Yeah.
And I just said, but she even said, it was their choice. You gave them the feedback 60 days ago and said, this is the issue. Here are the couple of things. We either need to work on this or you need to find, or it's just not going to be good. And so to be able to devoid myself, and that sounds callous, but I think you can still care and have to deliver that bad news to like having to let someone go.
Right.
I think there is a way to do that. It's not easy, and I've had to do it more than time. And I have resolved myself that there are several people over the years that I've had to, because positions were eliminated or whatever, that don't like me and they're bitter towards me. But I can only say, but that's their choice, right? It bothers me from a personal level, but I did what was right. I mean, I did what I had to do. And so it's hard to make that separation, but you can. As far as, managing up from delivering bad news, like maybe the business results aren't there or whatever. Again, back to owning it. Here's where we are. Here's where we're supposed to be. Here's what my team is doing. Here's what I individually am doing. Do you think I need to do something different? I mean, it's hard. It is so hard. And depending on where you are in your mental health, because I was doing really good with that, went through some trying times, a little depression, didn't do that so well. It was harder. But again, have now come through that and been like, okay, I'm in a better mental health. And I still did the same process. It was just a much harder self-talk during that time period.
Right.
Because to your point, I don't think we always talk about mental health enough.
No.
And I'm a big believer in talk to a psychologist, talk to a career counselor, get on medication. I'm like, do whatever you need to do. If it's get more sleep, go get your hormones checked because of my age. Like, do what you need to do because it's real. And as someone who's a very positive person, never to have gone through that, had a little bit of insight. Like when I had my second child and had a week or two of postpartum, I was like, oh, this is what it feels like, right? Because it's just not, some people are more predisposed than others. But a couple of years ago I did, and it was tough. But I also had somebody who I was working with, a career counselor or whatever. And I was trying to be open about things. And she said to me, she was like, have you ever talked to somebody about being, maybe you're depressed, about depression? And I was like, no. And it stopped me and it made me think. And I went, oh, I hadn't thought about that. Now think if she had not said that to me.
Right.
Would I have thought about it from that perspective? So, we all go through things and you learn from them. But I was fortunate in that, I had to have some constructive criticism, feedback during that time because our business results were not where they needed to be. We had just a lot going on. So then that I think also played into some stuff that was going on with me personally, that then it all kind of culminated. And so, to have a conversation with your manager who says, you're not hitting the result. I mean, even though I knew and I was saying, here's what I need you to be doing. Here's what I was like, I agree, but to have someone who was willing to say that to me, but also know that I must be going through something, didn't say to me because he wasn't sure. At that time, we had not, Dave and I had not worked together as long at that point, but to be able to say it and then me to hear that from, because again, I was going through some, and I think it's always good to have some professional coaching from time to time. I've done it 3 different times in my career and it's been great. And so I was in the process of doing one. Sorry. And she and Dave were talking, and I think he was noticing something. And so to be able to say that and then get through over a 3-month time period, had a crappy year, right? I mean, like, we didn't hit our business results. We didn't. But to own it, to know it, to get through it, and then to be able to talk about it. And so I am probably more open than most, but I've witnessed it on my team when people are going through stuff. And I think if, you don't have to be open, but I think sometimes if you are, then, we know you can deal with it, right? It's different if you don't know what's going on. Still doesn't mean that you might not have to be let go because of business results, right? I mean, that was still an option that could have happened to me, but I quickly got it around and started, and the progress was being made, right? And so I think that that's where, I know we went on a whole different tangent there, but I think it's important because it's the full circle, right? I mean, you only have 100% of your time, and it's just how does the pie slice.
Yeah.
And any given day, it can be different, of how much you're spending with work versus life versus family versus faith versus your own personal health,
And I love, so, one thing that I'm always trying to hit on with every woman is that it doesn't matter whether you're in corporate, whether you've started your own business, whether you're in nonprofit, whatever, it's all parallel experiences.
Absolutely.
And what you were talking about, a woman who's leading her own business could very well be in this exact same situation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I lead a business unit.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
So,
like you're intrapreneurial, I guess.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it happens, and it's funny as I've talked about this with others, like there's a lady that I work with at the bank, and she was like, I said, I'm a big believer in staying ahead of things and going. And I said, I've really learned because I was trying to stay ahead as being a premenopausal woman. I was trying to stay ahead, and then I got behind, and it just snowballed. And that's what ran into a lot of these issues. And I was talking to this lady, and she was like, it was hell for me during that time period for her, because she's a little bit older than me. And she was like, it's so smart you're doing this. Right. And it did help, and it does make a difference, and owning that and taking control versus it controlling you to be able to, I'm going to be healthy. I'm going to do these things, because you can work yourself into such a tizzy, whether you own a bit. I mean, it doesn't matter. I mean, and let's face it, there's a lot of responsibilities on women.
Absolutely. A lot.
I mean, it just men too. That's not, I mean, it depends. You may have a partner, you may not. And if you do, I hope it's, you can share the responsibilities, but sometimes there's just stuff, it's a lot more. We tend to take on more than we should as a gender, it's gender biased to a certain extent, but you know what I'm saying? I mean, typically
studies have proven with data that this is correct. Yes, data supports you.
Data supports it. I don't have the data, but I know it supports it. And so it is, we do, and it's, and it's hard. I mean, gosh, I can remember, in my career going, how do they read all the time? How do they say they read this? Well, I've learned how to, picked up tips and tricks around things to stay at least more. Do I read books? I skim them, I read highlight, I do enough. But, I'd hear these people ahead of me, 30 years in their career. Oh, I read a book a week. I'm like, I ain't got time for that. It's like, what do you do that? I'm like, I'm tired. How do you work out? How do you get the kids here? And so making those choices, and we tend to take on more than we should at times.
Yeah.
But it's okay. Again, back to owning it and saying, I'm doing too much. What can I cut out? A lot of it's self-talk, but sometimes that's very hard. And that's where I think the professional coaching comes in from a professional perspective, but then also just having somebody to talk to, also just even if you need it on the personal side from a relation, just psychologist from a mental health side besides the work health, but it's all mental health, but what I'm saying? I think you can get some perspectives, and it's helpful. Or just having that one person that's, your prayer partner, or your good friend that you just need to just be able to call and just blah, right? you got to have that. You got to have that release
Yeah.
in one. I mean, and I think you need multiple ones. So
Yeah, I think I talk a lot about like your village, who
yes,
are
you
your
do.
village.
You need a village.
And you have different people who
Right.
fit different needs. And
you've got to have that. It
Yeah.
is so important. And I can remember people talking about that and thinking, well, how? And then I'm like, oh yeah, but I do. I go to my dad for that. I go to my mom for that. I go to my friend for this. I go to this person for that. So whether you may not realize you truly have a village, because I didn't early on, and I was like, oh yeah, maybe I do, but it is important.
Yeah.
You've got to have that support.
And it's huge too for like a feeling like imposter or
Yes.
negative self-talk aspect too, is that if you're constantly just, it's me, myself, and I talking to myself, and I don't
That's
have
right.
anyone else
Yeah.
as an outlet, like it's just going to overtake you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think you need multiple. A lot of people some people are more talk to get it out. Others hold it in. Still good to try to talk it out. Some are easier than others, but I definitely think too, it's also good in that village that they're not all the same type, right? Like, cause we can tend to be drawn a certain way to certain personality types. And I think it's good to have multiple personalities. It's not easy because that may not be like, a jihad, but you need that because you need that person who totally sees it from a different perspective.
Yeah.
And will challenge you.
Yeah. I think that's one of the best managers I ever had, was someone who would always play devil's advocate for me. And
Whether they agreed with you or not, they were going to play the devil's advocate
exactly.
anyway.
He was always going to push me on it, that I had to, and I think it reminded me a little, because my dad's the same way. And my
Right.
dad would always push me. And I've realized like I need to always have someone around me who can be that role
Yes.
for me.
And I
doesn't
think
just
it's
say,
super important
Yeah.
in business, especially if you're starting your own business. I mean, I think it's important for a lot of different reasons, but especially if you are going to be in business. And look, I mean, I know we're talking about women in business, but have men too, right? I mean, you need to know that if you're if you're going to go meet with a group of 5 gray-haired 55, 60-year-olds, they have a different thought process, way they're going to present and think about it than the 5 25-year-old females, or even the 5 25 males, right? Like, I think it's good to get all of that. Have somebody from each of those, because they'll bring a different perspective. You don't have to agree with them, but you want them to challenge you, right? Around, hey, have you thought about this?
Right.
Or, again, it kind of goes back to selling too. Know your audience, right?
Exactly.
Like, if you're going to go make a presentation to somebody and they're, a 35-year-old CFO that's a female, and I've looked at her background versus a 70-year-old male, those presentations, I may be delivering the same, hey, here's what we can do for you, but those presentations look totally different.
Yes.
Totally. As they should, because it's your audience, right?
Yeah. And I mean, and the mark of a really good person who's a problem solver is being able to empathize and understand
Exactly.
the audience.
Right. So
you
from
have
an
to.
imposter perspective, somebody might say, well, you're just changing who you are for that person. Well, but am I doing that really for them, or am I doing it for me, or am I doing it so that I can make them feel more comfortable? How is that being an imposter? How is that, to your point, it's more of an empathetic, it's putting myself in their shoes. I'm not changing who I am, right?
Yeah.
But I know
It's more of your delivery.
Right. It's a modulation.
Yeah.
And it's a, hey, I know that if I am talking to somebody who's more of a reserved person, I don't need to be about, hey, how you doing? Give them a hug. Right. Right. Like, but that's not being an imposter. But I can see how somebody would say, well, you're just changing who you are to make that person buy from you. No, I just want to try to get to know them, and I want to, so I can do, but I'm not going to change who I am from that.
Yeah. And I know it can be a hazy gray line too,
absolutely.
because, with code switching and, the audience also having to be accepting of who you are and accept what you're saying. Yeah. Yeah.
Isn't it fun?
I
There's
know.
so much. You can almost get overwhelmed with all the psychology of everything that goes in, right?
Yeah.
To how somebody's sitting, what they do with all their hand gestures, as I've knocked the mic once or twice. Like that all plays into it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I know there is no one size fits all approach. It's complicated, but I mean, at the heart of it though, I think what you're saying, and this has always been my argument is I am trying to deliver a message that's essentially, I am arguing my point about something. And in order for someone to be accepting of my argument, I have to deliver it in a way that will make them the most likely to even listen to what I have to say and not shut me off immediately.
Yeah. It's about being open.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And that applies to so many different areas of life.
Absolutely. But especially in business.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, one thing I don't know if I do this in a workshop that I run for Let Her Speak. That's about the 5 different archetypes of imposter syndrome.
No, I have not seen that.
So there's, it's research that came out several years ago. And this woman who has done a huge amount of work in this area and in this topic, has written a lot of journal articles. She's in academia, developed and essentially categorized 5 different types of the way that imposter, and she's also one of the ones that argued that it's a misnomer to say it's a syndrome, but it's become such common wording that everybody,
it's like your personality typing.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. She was like, it's it's a phenomenon, not a syndrome. So it's like, it's not that you're inherently flawed or that you need fixing. It's more of like, it's a phenomenon that every human feels.
You go through it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Can I do this? Questioning.
Yep.
Am I really? Yeah.
Yep. And so the archetypes, and I'll go through them with you because I think every time I go through them with people, everyone identifies with multiple. And it also, sometimes it depends on the day. Some days they're feeling this way. Right? I mean, we're humans. So the ones are perfectionist and which is pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah.
I need everything to be 100% correct, 100% right. I'm not going to go forward unless it is. There's Superwoman, which is I need to do all the things in order to prove myself, or Superman, super person. There is the natural born genius, where if I don't know it, I'll never learn it, but I have to inherently know it.
Okay, that's hilarious. That's a good one. I like that name.
There's the expert, which is someone who, a lot of times those people who identify with that find it very difficult to say, I don't know. And they don't want to be found out as a fraud, that if they don't know the answer to something. And then the last one is the soloist of, I'm the one that can do it. Yeah. You see, and a lot of people, it's like, well, depending on the day, I'm probably any of those 5.
Well, sure. No, but when you said soloist, I'm not saying that's me. I'm just saying, but I can see how that a soloist is. I can do it all.
Yeah.
Not that all super, but it's all on me to
exactly.
make it happen.
I have to do it alone. I can't
have somebody else, nobody, you can't do anything alone. No. I mean, well, you can play the piano alone, but somebody had to teach you, right? Anyway, whatever.
And somebody has to be there to listen to you. Probably. I mean, you can play for yourself. That's cool.
But I'm just saying, I'm just thinking through that. That's so funny. Yes.
Yeah. No. So I didn't know if there was any in particular that it's on a more, I guess,
where I tend to, where my bias is tending.
Yeah.
Probably, I probably struggle more with the perfectionist piece of it, but I am willing to say I don't know, and I like to learn. So, but I like things to be right. Mm-hmm. Right. So, but it doesn't have to be perfect. But that's probably one that where I would see myself probably tending to be more. But I'll have to ask my team where they see.
Yeah, you should ask them.
So where do you see me in these? And where do we see each other? Because that's always fun to do.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good conversation starter. I think
it is a great.
If nothing else, it's more of a, at least I know I'm not the only one.
Right.
Which is what I've found when I share it with people is that, I feel like for one thing, I'm seen and I'm understood better, but also I know that I can't be the only one then
That feels this way.
Yeah.
And I'd say I probably fall into that superwoman category at times.
That's very common.
I do know, especially when my children were younger and working. And yeah, I definitely know I was way more pressure and yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say almost any full-time working mother is a superwoman.
Yes.
Almost every
Because you're
single
juggling
one.
so much.
Exactly,
Yes.
exactly. But and I'd say
And I
majority
didn't
of
juggle all by myself. I'm just saying.
but still,
yes.
there's a lot of things that are like what things moms do that aren't are
Yes.
more common.
Yes.
That you see that is taken on by a mom.
Not as much now. Well, yes and no. It depends on the day.
It depends. Yeah.
But way more so. Definitely that way more so.
Yeah. Like 20 years ago or.
Well, I'm not that old. No.
Well, you said your son is 20. So I was thinking when he was a baby.
Well, yeah. Well, even still, because he's still in college,
Yeah.
but yes, and he's home for the summer. So yeah, it's a little more so. Probably more like, from the time they were babies up to even like high school before they started driving. Yeah, that time period. Yeah, because you're running them here, there, and everywhere. And
yeah.
Balancing schedules and dinner and who's picking up where, especially if you have multiple children and
Yep, and appointments and doctor's visits.
And then you got
all that
work
stuff.
and getting all your stuff done and making
Yep.
sure you're doing that. And
Yeah.
people pleasing all those constituents.
Yeah. And I see that of like superwoman, I think is predominantly a majority of women who work.
Oh, I think
full
so.
time. I mean, and women who are stay-at-home moms too, though.
Can I just tell you?
I mean, that's full-time work.
Let me just say that for all the women out there that are thinking about this. So when we moved back to Knoxville, the plan was for me to stay home. The family took bets on how long I would stay home. Because there is only so much exercise, cleaning. Now, granted, I was transitioning kids, building a house, selling a house, whatever. I lasted 6 months because it's harder. A lot of my friends don't work. A lot of my good friends don't work. And I would just say it's easier to go to work at times. I mean, and that sounds horrible. And I love my children and I spent a lot of time with them and, but it's a stay-at-home mom is a much harder job than I think a lot of working women at times. They're like, oh, well, I work. I'm like, I never thought that way. I was like, you do way more than I do. I was like, it's a much harder job.
And I think a portion
Much
of it
harder
too, to some degree, is that you don't have as much of a built-in community.
That is the part that I miss.
It's extremely lonely.
It can be, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's where, like, I noticed, like I volunteered in the school. And so I was building that network. But because I had been in business for so many years, for 15 years or 13, whenever before we moved back to Knoxville, I missed that business connectivity because I was so used to it. Now, I mean, I built that network some with the stay home, but it wasn't the same. But part of it was I missed what I did because I loved what I did. Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, I do think that that can be a very isolating. And so you got to be purposeful about, that's why I was going to exercise at 10 o'clock with the jazzercise people and meeting women, like you gotta, and volunteering at different nonprofits and things like that so that you do build that network because you do need to have that outlet.
Yeah.
Personal opinion, if you can.
I'm not a mother, but my husband and I have talked at length about if any of us becomes a stay-at-home parent, it's going to be him. And he's totally happy with if that right. becomes a necessity.
And you know what? And there's more and more of that, more common. And I think that's good. I mean, my husband wants to retire sooner than I do. And I'm like, great, you can be a stay-at-home dad. I mean, there won't be kids there anymore. But I was like, I think I know several women that I've worked with that's, and you do what works for your family when you have a family. You have to do, I think those are just decisions that you have to make, and be open about them. And hopefully you have a partner that's willing to have those open discussions.
Yeah. Yeah. And being in the places that, I think it's mainly also following where your energy levels,
absolutely.
Bump up. And it's, on the weekends we'll go to, like different shops or we'll go to farmers markets. And, most of the time I see someone that I know and they want to talk business with me. And it's like, I'd love to talk business. I don't care what day it is, what hour it is. Like I will talk about your business strategy. Let's let's
all
do
day,
it.
every day. Yeah.
I find it so fun to do. And
Right.
so I know that I know my personality well enough to know like, there's no way I could be stay-at-home because I would need to be out talking to people
Right.
about things outside of like taking care of a child. I need to talk about like building empires or things like
That's
that.
kind of how I was.
Yeah.
Like I said, I did it for 6 months.
Give it a try.
I did, but I just missed it too much. I missed some of the intellectual stimulation.
Yes. Yeah.
Even though I
would
was doing
say
other
yes.
things, I just missed some of that.
Yeah.
I also missed a little bit being in the know because when you do work in business, you just know about things going on, right?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of fun.
Yeah, yeah. And especially when, I mean, I have that same type of personality of just, I love to know
Yeah.
things that are up and coming, what's going on.
It's just cool.
And,
It's fun to see.
Yeah.
Watch our community grow.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, we talked a little bit about, earlier in your career, but, what has been, and as time has gone on, how you've evolved and started, understanding these different tactics to take and the self-talk and everything. So what has been, do you think, one of the biggest things that you've learned as time has gone on and you've grown as a leader and grown in your industry?
Well, I'm not a great leader. I'm still learning, right? I think you're always learning, and people say that it's like a cliche, but no, I think it's really true. Cause like we do some informal and formal mentoring within the bank. And so they have like this mentoring program and you put in your interest and then they match you with people and stuff. And so like I was talking to somebody we had a mentoring session and he's in Atlanta and he was asking me stuff. And I was like, well, here's some things I would do. We were talking through some situations and I was like, let me just tell you, I'm telling you all this, but this is stuff I learned like 5 years ago and I haven't used it in a while. So so part of it I think is you hear it, you take a nugget or two and you work on that. And then you maybe go and pull that same training or go to the same seminar or read kind of the same kind of literature about doing this or whatever. And you go, oh, and you glean something else. So for me, I think part of it is, one, it's exposure, back to that professional maturity. Sometimes you're just not exposed to it, right? Mm-hmm. And then two, a lot of it's experiential from the perspective of, and this is how it was early in my career, but when I was learning as a banker, as a relationship manager, to now how I've moved it into learning as a manager. And that is watching, I would go like with seasoned bankers and I would see what they were saying, or I would see how their letters were, and I would see how I would watch the customer's reaction, and I'd take it and go, like commit it to memory of, okay, I need to try that, and then modulate it for maybe my own style, but use a phrase or whatever. And I've really done that a lot as I've moved into this management role and been managing now, I think like 9 years, which seems crazy. But anyway, in this here at this bank anyway, is talking to others, like being vulnerable and like calling Renee Drake, who runs a much bigger team than I do in Nashville and been doing this longer than I am, like, I have this issue. How did you handle this? What did you say? How did you say it? Like getting to the real brass tacks around, I have this situation. How would you handle it? What would you tell me exactly what you said, right? Tell me how you do it. And just hearing that to then take it. And I may not have done it all, but like, to me, that's how I've learned is really, and then to use that and then try it with someone, right? Like back to this whole, the thing that I said about, I'm giving you the feedback, choose with it it's your choice what to do. Well, that was something that somebody said to me about, like I said, Pam had kind of phrased it that way a little bit. And so I was like, and that was the first time, because this was a really tough message to deliver to someone. Mm-hmm. It was tough. And I wasn't sure how they would take it. And it took them by surprise. But I saw how it was hard, and it was hard for me too. But I saw how they appreciated it, right? Like they didn't appreciate it necessarily at the moment, but they did later. And so to say, gosh, I've been at times timid or wanted to maybe spin it a little more positively than just be matter of fact. And so, again, back to, I think some of that is that maturing and how I have changed a little bit around in my maturing process to say, I can't always control, by the perfectionist speak, but I need to tell because it's only fair to them to know. Right? I would want to know if I was sitting in their shoes. And so I do think that that's probably really how over the last, 9 years from starting my kind of managing our team to today, how that really has changed and watching it from others and seeing them and have them talk about those examples, being willing to say, hey, tell me how, and then employing those it's been interesting.
Yeah.
I
think it comes back
it's
to,
hard.
I mean, one of my favorite pieces of advice was always just ask. Just
Right.
ask. Just ask the question that's on your mind. Just ask somebody. I mean, and the worst thing that they can say is either I don't know or no, I'm not going to tell you.
Right.
Or, some iteration of that.
Most people are willing to help,
Exactly.
especially if they know you're struggling.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Like I can remember having some of those conversations with Renee and Jim Atchley and others around what about, and they're like, here's what here's a similar situation. Here's what I did. Doesn't mean I'm going to do exactly like, but just to say, hey, give me some advice. Tell me how you would handle it. What do you suggest I do? Because here's what I'm struggling with. I'm struggling with delivering this tough message.
Yeah.
Because I know it's going to hurt their feelings. And I'm trying to take the feeling piece out. We always have feelings, but I'm trying to take the personality piece out of it to just say, here's what you need to be aware of, self-aware, right? So I'm being self-aware, but then, and that's hard.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important, what you just mentioned though, is that being specific and saying, I need not, because I've always been a fan of the more generalized ask you have, the more generalized
Answer you'll get.
Exactly. But being extremely specific, this is what I'm going through. This is what I really need help with.
And this is what was told to me. And here's the message I need to deliver.
Yes.
Help me phrase and be the best way to deliver this.
Yes.
And I appreciated that I had built relationships such that they knew where I was coming from, because nobody's seen every situation you're ever going to deal with. Yeah. None of us have. So find somebody who, it may be 3 people you talk to before you get okay, yeah, that really fits my situation. That's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Goes back to having plenty in your village to talk to. Yeah.
And we don't know it all.
No, nor will we ever.
Nor will we ever.
Yeah.
And that's okay, because I'm not sure I'd want that burden.
No.
That would be a burden,
I don't want to know at all.
That would be a burden if you think about it. Everyone would come to you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you all asking Courtney. I was like, what do I know? It's funny when people are like, I just so love talking. I'm like, I don't know anything. I just talk and tell you my experiences. I'm like, I don't have this great wisdom.
Is knowing things.
Yes, but I'm like, it's not like I have all this great words of wisdom, but it's just funny. I think you can you can always learn from
exactly
different people.
I mean, and you have specific experiences. I'm sure that a lot of things you brought up. Exactly. And it not necessarily only people in the same situation you're in, but it's so broad. Exactly what you're doing it's connections and humans and talking to people and
delivering tough messages.
Exactly.
Is not always easy.
No, but thank you so much. And
no, thank you.
And I mean, First Horizon's just been an amazing partner for us.
They're a great bank. I would tell you. And even though we're being, we have this acquisition to be acquired by TD, very similar cultural, which is great, and very big in the community if you look at their stuff. So we're pretty excited about that we won't lose, because that's one of the big things with First Horizon. Again, I worked at Nations Bank, Bank of America, and others, and it's a unique culture. People, it's just unique. I don't know how to explain. There's a lot of care, and granted, not in general, it's a caring place, and obviously within certain teams, it's even more so. But it is interesting. It's a great place to work. And I tell people, there's a lot of change in banking, constant. If you don't like change, don't get into the banking world, because it's always changing. But if you got to be, and I really I've enjoyed working for the bank. And like I said, I've been there 16 years this October.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy.
It goes fast.
It does. Oh my gosh, yes. And you hear all these people say, "Oh, my kid was just this and there." I'm like, "I've never been there." I'm like, "Oh gosh, yeah, I am." I'm like, "Oh, I am that old," you know. So it's kind of fun.
Yeah.
But thank you so much.
Yeah, thank
It's been great.
Hi, friends. It's Catherine coming back to check in on all of you. So, you just heard the 13th episode of the She Speaks podcast, and you might have figured it out by now, but if not, when we have these check-in expert sessions, or not so mini-sodes, as I am going to be calling them, we do a little bit of a homework assignment for you based off of all of the stories that you've heard, the stories of trial and triumph, of grief and goodness. And you just heard a few from a few women a few episodes ago, Sarai Taylor Roman and Steph Blue, about a lot of things that they've gone through, that they've grown through, and that they've realized that they're capable of. And same with Tiffany Gardner, where we were talking about in this episode that you just listened to, imposter syndrome, and what that looks like, how you combat that, how you work through that. And you might not know this, but imposter syndrome comes in a lot of different forms. It's not just thinking I'm not good enough or I don't belong here. It can raise its ugly head in a lot of different ways. It can come across as mom guilt and feeling like you have to be a superwoman in all the things and be perfect in all the things, like Steph Blue was talking about. It can come up in getting all of these hints and signs from the universe that you should be doing something with some of your skills, and not recognizing that all of those hints and signs were there until much, much later. Like with Sarai, realizing that coaching was the next step for her because she is an amazing teacher and she's amazing in what she does and she loves to help people. And those hints were there for a long time. And speaking as someone who knows her, I think a lot of us saw that, but it took a little bit to recognize that for her personally, which can also be a part of imposter syndrome. So for your homework, after listening to our 13th episode, there's a couple things that I want you to think about and I want you to work on. One of the things is to look at what are the signs and the hints that the world, the universe, and everything in it are giving you right now. There's a lot of noise out there, whether that's on your cell phone, whether that's on your computer, on the TV, noise all around you, coming at you all of the time. And it's really, really difficult to not think about the future and just remain mindful and present. So that's my homework for you. Number one is practice at least for 5 minutes today. Carve out a little bit of time and just be present with what is going on right now. What is your mind telling you? What is your body telling you? What is the world around you telling you? And a lot of that can be a part of your instincts. So instincts are very important. What is all of that saying to you? And what is it that you are continuously ignoring or not fully listening to, just because you maybe haven't had enough time to sit quietly and think about it and to be very mindful of what's going on? Because a lot of the answers are out there. If you're searching for some answers right now, more than likely they are right there in front of you. But it requires you to be mindfully present, to sit with stillness, and to recognize what are those hints, what are those signs, what are those things that are trying to scream at you and maybe you're just not noticing right now. So that's your primary homework assignment, is to be still, to listen, to trust your instinct, and to embrace exactly what the world is telling you, that you need to do, or that you are, or that you can be. So I hope you have a great day, and I hope that you join us again soon. This episode of She Speaks is brought to you by our amazing partners at First Horizon Bank. She Speaks is produced, edited, and scored by the very talented Travis Tench at Oak Hill Audio. If you loved the episode you just heard and want to support Let Her Speak's mission of elevating real women's stories, don't forget to follow, subscribe, and share at Let Her Speak USA. Together, we will make our voices heard.